Let me ask you a question. What is the longest you have ever gone without eating? I know that sounds like a strange question, but why did you go that long without eating? Were you on a diet? Were you fasting? Maybe it was like me. I was just in college and I didn't have any money. But whatever the reason, to some degree, you know what it's like to be hungry. And the funny thing about it is the more you try not to think about being hungry, the hungrier you get. You know how that works, don't you? Someone has said that when it comes to going without the physical necessities to sustain life, most people live or die by what is called the rule of three. You can survive for 3 minutes without air, 3 days without water, and 3 weeks without food. Now, I've never come close to starving to death, and yet I know what it is like to be hungry. It happens every day. In fact, it happens several times a day. It happens to all of us. In the fourth beatitude, Jesus is using this feeling, this experience of daily hunger that is common and universal to all people, to help us understand how important our desire to live a righteous life should be. Here's what he said: "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst after righteousness, for they shall be satisfied." Now, in essence, Jesus is saying that we should want to live a righteous life as much as we'd like to sit down to a great big, juicy, medium rare steak that's been grilled over mesquite wood, or maybe some fresh Alaskan salmon with Parmesan cheese on, or maybe, you get the picture, don't you? Yeah. We should hunger and thirst after righteousness. But what is righteousness? Well, that's part of what we're going to find out in this week's study. But let's just say for now that righteousness is living in a manner that is in keeping with the character and nature of God. You see, God doesn't do what is right, but whatever God does, that is right. So in order to know what is right, what is righteous, I need to discover what the character and nature of God is. Then I live in a manner that is in keeping with God's character and nature. That is righteous living. That is righteousness. Living that way really can be quite a contradiction to how people live on earth today. The character of our nature, the character of our society and the character of our culture. It really does require an exchanged life, the principles of heaven for people on earth. You know, as we study the Gospels, we find that Jesus often clashed with a group of Jewish religious leaders who were called the Pharisees. They were fanatics about keeping the law, not just the law of Moses, but a whole other group of laws as well. Laws that they made up in an earnest attempt to make certain that they kept the laws of God. They believed that by keeping the law of Moses and their additional laws, that they would become righteous, and consequently, well, they'd pay for a ticket. They'd earn a ticket to heaven. At one time, Jesus even gave the Pharisees a kind of a token nod of recognition for their extreme attempts to keep the law. It was kind of a backhanded nod, though. He told people that unless they were more righteous than the Pharisees, then they could never have any hope of going to heaven, because the Pharisees were the most law-keeping, self-righteous people that anybody knew. And if anybody was going to make it to heaven because of their own self-righteousness, it would be the Pharisees. Now, listen carefully. Jesus didn't say that the Pharisees were going to heaven because of their self-righteousness, but he knew that the people were aware of all of the laws of the Pharisees and all the requirements and all the stipulations, and that they knew they would never be able to do all that the Pharisees taught. Nobody could, not even the Pharisees. So Jesus said that if anybody hoped to go to heaven by keeping a set of laws, by virtue of their own self-righteousness, then they would have to do better than even the Pharisees. Now, of course, then Jesus turned right around later and accused the Pharisees of hanging all of their laws over the heads of the common people when they didn't even keep them themselves. So here's a suggestion for an activity you might have in your group. You can go to a Jewish website. I've included the link in the material that you can download from our church website, the same place where you get your lessons. You can go to that website, and there is the list of the 613 laws that the Pharisees had developed. Just start reading down through the list and ask if there's anyone there in the group who has ever kept every single one of them. Now remember, Jesus said that if we have any hope of going to heaven based on our own self-righteousness, our ability to keep the laws, all of those laws, you would have to do better than the Pharisees. That means keeping every single one of these laws and more. Chances are good that nobody will even come close. I have also included a story from the book, The Year of Living Biblically, on the website. You might want to have someone read it. It's humorous, and yet it helps to make the point of how hard it is to keep every single point of the law. It's impossible. The idea that you were trying to communicate is that if we're ever going to be righteous as God commands, then it has to happen in some way other than our own efforts. It has to be the work of God. I pray that you have a wonderful study of the exchanged life this week and that you learn the principles of heaven for people on earth. God bless.